In this presentation, we are going to talk a little bit about some of the common mistakes that people make when they're presenting in briefings, in conferences and speeches, when they have to say a few words to the team, to the business. So this is less about a formal presentation skills program. It's not about, are you a trainer or are you somebody who has to regularly speak? But it's aimed very specifically at people that just occasionally have to stand up and say a few words. And even more specifically than that, it's opened at the first few moments in your presentation. So not when you've got going, when you've got your slides up, when things are going well, we hope, but those opening moments. Because here's what I've noticed. Very often, whenever somebody has to speak who's not very used to doing it, let's be honest, it's a little bit awkward. It's a bit tricky, and you don't really know what you should or shouldn't say. And what tends to happen is that people fall back on the same behaviors and the same styles of presentation and the same little bits and pieces that really aren't helping them. And what you need to know is this. In the opening moments of your presentation, your audience is most engaged. Same again, by the way, at the end of the presentation. And I might do another video on the end of the presentation, but this is really focused on those opening 2, 3, 4 minutes. Because not only is this the time that your audience is most engaged and most switched on, but it's also part of the presentation that most speakers give least thought to. If I were to ask you about the last presentation you gave, and remember, this is going to be anything as informal as when, I don't know, your team has been running through various ideas and somehow it's fallen to you to stand up and pull it all together, or to say a few words, or to launch the training day, those sorts of things. And if I were to ask you to think, what were the first words out of your mouth? It's entirely possible you wouldn't really remember. It's a bit of a blur. You remember making some joke about this hopefully isn't too bad. Maybe you're overrunning, you'll try and catch back time. You might have said, can you hear me at the back? If you're using a microphone or something. If there were lights involved, you may have done that whole thing you see people do on stage where they put their hands over their eyes. And I'm not saying anything bad's going to happen if you do this, right? The world's going to continue to turn. But if you're going to stand up, if you're going to go through what is for some people quite an awkward and embarrassing process, having to stand up and say a few words, why don't we make the most of it? And by the way, exactly the same principles when you're working on Teams or Zoom, when you're working online. People tend to go through the same little run of pieces at the beginning. And to a degree, we can't avoid that because we know people have trouble logging in. We know how people have trouble apparently turning up on time. There are certain things that are always going to happen. But there are also lots of habits that we've got into and phrases that we use that don't help. So this little session, and it's a very little session, is focused on 5 things that I'm calling presentation no-nos, right? And these are just, as I say, in the first few minutes. And I've only got 3 slides, and this is one of them here. So there's no massive difficulty here. I'm just going to jump straight into this, and you will be able to see all of the no-nos on the screen. And then I'm going to get into what I'm going to suggest you start to do instead. Now, if you're not very good at presenting, if you find it nerve-wracking, if you find it awkward, if it's embarrassing, if you'd rather have teeth pulled than stand up and say a few words, you are absolutely in the majority. Most people hate doing this. So let's just acknowledge that. And let's also acknowledge if we want to make the most out of this, we need to maybe put a bit of effort in and maybe a few things slightly different. So these are my 5 no-nos. Don't be sorry. Don't be late. Don't give context. Don't promise greatness. And don't explain everything. Let me run through those 5 because I can't guarantee that you do at least one of these 5, but the odds are in my favor. Don't be sorry. So many presentations start with the speaker apologizing for the late running, for the fact that the content's going to be a bit dry, for the fact that they're a bit nervous, for the fact that lunch wasn't quite as promised, for the fact that something else has gone wrong, for the fact that the slides are a bit small. And the problem with all of this is it's a force of habit. You're not doing it because perhaps you think the audience is going to be won over by you. You're not doing it because You genuinely need to explain it. Now, you've heard the old phrase, haven't you? The audience doesn't know what you were going to say. The audience doesn't know what was supposed to happen. So when you tell them what was supposed to happen and what a shame it was that it didn't, all you're doing is highlighting what went wrong. When you tell people you're nervous, what do you think is going to happen? They're not going to go, oh, bless, and be much nicer. They're still going to watch you the way they were going to watch you before, except now they know you're nervous. And they're going to notice if your mouth goes a bit dry, if you get a little bit of shake in your hands, if you get the clammy palms, all those things that we often get, if the words just fly out of your mind, if you go bright pink, your neck goes all warm, all those things. Now, because you've pre-warned your audience, they're more likely to notice. And you know what happens when they notice? You will see that they have seen. And what you've then got is a feedback loop. And that just gets worse and worse and worse. And by the way, it's the same as when you say, we were supposed to be doing this and I'm really sorry. And the problem is you'll then get people tutting and rolling their eyes and folding their arms and looking a bit negative about it. So don't be sorry. Now, this is not about being arrogant. It's not about just blistering through regardless of what people think or are worried about. But it is about understanding that presenting is tough. I do it all the time. And it still requires energy and concentration and effort. And if it's something you don't do very often, in those opening moments, make it easy for yourself. Don't start apologizing. Second, don't be late. Now, this is a tricky one. This is tricky. We all know there are certain people or certain teams that turn up late. So do we just start regardless? Well, we ought to try and get as close to that as possible. Many organizations find themselves in a bit of a pattern. And what happens is it becomes learned behavior. We know that if the time is supposed to start at 12, we actually start at 10 past 12. So therefore, we don't worry about arriving at 5 past 12 because we're still kind of in time. So what you've got to do really with the starting on time is you've really got to try and start on time. If you've got enough people to get going, get going. And when people come in a bit late, don't stop, don't recap, don't make a thing of them coming in. Now, that's very easy for me to say. And sometimes, of course, you have to wait because somebody senior is late, because the majority or the key person that you need there is late. But as an absolute guide, the don't be late thing is key. And it's difficult. It is difficult. But we'll talk about what you might want to do instead. So we've got don't be sorry, we've got don't be late. Don't give context. Now, this is a strange one. Very often, when people who are new to speaking or not very regular speakers, they will do little filler content at the start. They'll say things like, I want to give you a bit of context before we get going. Or you'll hear things like, I just want to give you the background to how we arrived at this. Sometimes if you are pitching a product or a service, you might say things, just a little bit about me before we get started, or let me show you some pictures of our business. Now, the problem is, and this is going to sound cruel, it's going to sound like I'm being a bit flippant, and I'm really not. No one cares. Not really. Nobody really cares. Now, of course, you can find individuals that do and people that are interested. By and large, what we want is what's in it for us. So if I'm made to listen to your speech, if I've been whisked into the room, wheeled into the room and made to hear your pitch, if you're the boss or if you are launching a product in the organization, I probably might have a bit of curiosity about what's going on, but I'm interested in knowing what it is that's going on. I don't want all the context. I almost don't care who you are. I don't care about the business. I want to know what it is that I'm here to find out about. So this tendency to want to explain context, it comes from a nervousness. It comes from a lack of confidence in what you're about to explain or talk about. It comes from a worry, perhaps, that people won't take it seriously or won't understand why they're hearing it. But it very rarely achieves anything. It really does. So the whole let's talk about me, let's talk about the business, let's talk about why we're doing this. I would suggest There are better ways to do that. And I'll get onto that in the third and final slide in just a minute. Right, we have 2 more left to go on the absolute no-nos that I am suggesting the first 3-4 minutes are the things that will dilute your ability to present as well as you can. Now, so we're absolutely clear. If you continue to do any or all of these 5, nothing bad will happen. The world will keep turning. But if you want to be a better presenter, a better speaker, if on the once in a while you have to stand up and say a few words for a team briefing, these are 5 things that you want to stop doing now. Number 4, don't promise greatness. That's a strange thing to say, right? Well, what do I mean by it? Sometimes there's a program that gets launched, a series of workshops perhaps, or you might have an external trainer come in. And when you first start, you might have been doing a bit of that number 3 there, the giving the context, because you're nervous about how well it's going. But actually what happens is the training has gone really well, or the workshops are really well received. And even though people look a bit skeptical to begin with, by the end of the event, they're all switched on, they're whooping, they're cheering, they're whatever outcome you're looking for. The problem is, once you know what the content of the program or the announcement or the launch or the training or the workshop, whatever it is that's coming up, once you know that, if you're promising it's coming up, you're actually setting yourself up to trip up over your own feet. It's a little bit like back in the day when you'd say to your partner or your parents or whoever, oh, this is a great show, you got to watch it. And you get them to sit down and watch it with you. And that's the one week it's a bit rubbish. And you find yourself going, oh, it's normally better than this. It's normally better than this. And they sit there going, yeah, it's all right. It's not so bad. Oh, it's normally so much better. The problem with the don't promise greatness thing is that we set ourselves up. And there's sometimes for some people, and you know these people, a bit of a mentality to sit back and fold their arms. And if you said, oh, it's really fun or it's engaging or it's really useful, there are some people who will sit back and attempt for you to force them to be amazed or engaged or switched on or entertained or whatever thing you've told them is going to happen. So promising great stuff's coming down the line, although it sounds energetic and lovely and fantastic, it often doesn't help you. Remember, we're talking about those first 3, 4, 5 minutes of the presentation. And the last one, don't explain everything. This again is slightly contentious. I have seen so many presentations that start with an agenda. Now, an agenda sounds right. Yeah, it sounds sensible. It's good business practice. People like to know what's coming up. Well, yes, they do, but they don't want it in mind-numbing detail. And even if they do, when you give them every last detail to the minute, if you've got a day's event and you're launching that day and you say, well, yeah, by 11:30, we'll have coffee, 11:45, this will happen. And then the MD's coming down to say a few words, and then we'll do a Q&A with the directors, and then so-and-so from the pension service. You get the picture, right? The problem is, first, they start to tune out because there's too much detail at the start of the session. Remember, this is our first few minutes. Second, they can't follow it all because it's just being bombarded with detail. Third, they start to look ahead for the bits that they want, and worse, they start to look ahead for the bits they don't want. If you've got a bad speaker, or you've got an event or a part of the event that isn't so entertaining perhaps or so engaging, you are actually pre-preparing them to tune out at that bit. And finally, there are some people, and we all know them, who will now be watching by the minute to see whether we're on schedule. Too much detail doesn't help you. So what are the betters? What are the alternatives to these 5? So we said, don't be sorry, don't be late, don't give context, don't promise greatness, don't explain everything. I'm pretty confident you will do at least one of those. And I'm going to suggest instead you are going to do these 5 things. These are much easier to explain because I've told you what not to do. These are the 5 things I'd like to do instead. Number 1, be confident. Now, that's easy for me to say, right? So what do I mean by it? It doesn't mean you have to be bouncing around the room. It doesn't mean you have to be woohoo, high-fiving people. It does mean this. You need to understand that you have been told by your boss, or you've decided, or the opportunity has presented itself, whatever the background is, to present at this thing. And so in the nicest possible way, you have to do it. Not only that, your audience has to listen. Bear with me. That sounds an odd way to see this, but you're all contractually obliged to do this. So we don't need to go in and start saying, oh, being a bit mealy-mouthed, a little bit this going on. We don't need to. I was speaking to an event very recently, and there's a guy in the front row, and he had been moaning for 15 minutes before he came into the room. And within 30 seconds of us talking, he had said something about, I don't know why I'm here. I don't want to be here. And I just said to him, well, the thing is, you've been sent, right? He says, yeah, I've been sent. So I said to your boss wants you here. And he went, yeah, my boss wants me here. So I said, so your boss wants you here? And I've been paid to be here. Your colleagues have all been told to be here. That's it then, isn't it? That's the discussion over. We're here. We may as well get on with it. And even him, to his credit, went, yeah, I suppose so. So you need to come into these events. That's it. We're doing it. This is what we're doing. Don't be apologizing for it. If your slides are too small, people can't read them, don't show those slides. If your content is too dry, make it less dry. Or don't worry about it, just present it. You've got to do it, right? Start and finish on time. You absolutely must do this. Now, sometimes starting on time is difficult. I was starting to allude to that a minute ago. However, what you can nearly always do is finish on time. Now, this means you need to make some changes and alterations and cuts. It means you need to know your content well enough. It means sometimes you need to drop bits of stuff. It's a longer event. It's a whole day, 2 days events, but don't be overrunning. You don't want to be the person after lunch going, oh, we're going to try and have a shorter break. We only have 5 minutes. We'll try and catch back some time. This happened in the morning. Then that happens. Start and finish on time. I can't tell you the number of times I've started an event and I've said to people, right, we'll be finished at 11 o'clock. And at 10:58, I'm saying, right, well, we are just about to finish. So just before we go, here's a couple of things. And when they check out on the dotted 11 or 10:59, it's great. It means that they know how much attention and energy to bring to the event. Listen, if you know that you've got to finish at 11 o'clock and at 5 to 11, you realize it's going to be another 20 minutes, all of a sudden you start rocking on the seat because you need the bathroom. You need to make a phone call. Or you're really thirsty. Your brain starts reminding you you have other things to do. So start on time, finish on time. Number 3, get the audience started. At the beginning of your event, get them doing something. Tell them a story. Ask them a question. Get straight into what you're doing and why you're doing it. Don't bother telling us who you are. Don't bother telling us about your organization. Don't show us photos of your org chart. Oh my goodness. Stop doing that. Get straight into it. Give us some content so that we know why we're here and we're interested. Number 4, self-discovery. Remember I said this whole point about over-explaining and explaining that everything's going to be amazing, right? This is 4 and 5. These 2 points come together beautifully. So allow people to discover for themselves why you think it's great. And if they think it's even better, fantastic. If they think it's okay, good. They've been pleasantly surprised. Don't be trying to pitch it for them to influence that they're going to have a great time as well. Let them get to those conclusions in their own time. People love to discover stuff themselves, don't they? People love to come to their own conclusions. So why not let them? Allow them that space to get to that point so they go, yeah, cool. So that self-discovery bit is important. You know, when you find a show or you find a book or you find a piece of work or you find a speaker that you really like, you find somebody on social media, it's great. Even if they've got 3 million followers, you feel you've discovered something. And finally, this overview only. It's a really good idea when your presentation, when your pitch, when your start of your 20 minutes is going, if you need to give us an overview, 2, 3 sentences, here's what's coming up. This is what I'm going to share with you. This is what we'll have covered by the end of this session. And what it means is your audience know what's coming up in the back of their minds. They know the bits that they roughly want to focus in on, but you've not given them so much detail that they're absolutely swamped. They've tuned out before you even started, and they're starting to consider which bits they want to listen to and which bits they don't. And that is a very brief, what are we on, 19 minutes session called Presentation No Notes. My name's Graham from Blue Beetle People Solutions. You can find me all over LinkedIn. And I most often help people with presentations, with briefings, and we deliver a whole range of training and conference subjects. But you don't want to hear all of that now. So if you want to know more about it, find me, connect to me. I'll have a virtual coffee. Other than that, listen, please put into into practice some of these points I've just made and avoid the no-nos, and I'll see you soon.